June 28, 1997, an 83-year-old woman named Leila Howard turned up the radio in the living room of her small home in Texas, and then she took a seat next to her husband, Raymond, on the couch. This was a song that both of them loved, and in the past, Leila knew her husband would have swooped her up and begun dancing with her right away. But Raymond was now 88 years old, he was also recovering from brain surgery, and they both were planning to go to bed in the next few minutes because they had a big day the next day. They were going to go to the Pioneer Day Music Festival, which is an annual fiddling festival located about 15 miles away from where Leila and Raymond lived, in the town of Salado, Texas. Leila and Raymond attended this festival basically every year, and so even though Raymond right now was a bit fragile from his surgery and his advanced age, the couple had not even considered missing it. Leila's son Hal had tried to persuade Leila to let him, Hal, drive the couple to the music festival, but Leila said no because Leila and Raymond were both fiercely independent and wanted to be in control of their lives, which included driving to and from this festival. Also, Leila had talked about maybe going someplace else after the festival ended with Raymond, kind of spontaneously just driving out and doing something, and so she really wanted to have her own car in case she did want to do that. And so after a few minutes, Leila and Raymond's favorite song came to an end, and the DJ hopped back on the radio and began talking about the weather and the traffic, and at that point, Raymond and Leila, they stood up from the couch, they took each other's hands, and they walked upstairs to go to bed. The next morning, so June 29th, Leila and Raymond walked out the front door of their house, and they walked down to their driveway where their Oldsmobile car was parked. Leila helped Raymond get into the passenger seat, and then Leila took her spot in the driver's seat. And then a few moments later, after they were all buckled in and situated, Leila fired up the car, backed out the driveway, and began driving. That evening, Leila's son, Hal, decided to swing by Leila and Raymond's house to check in on them and see how the festival went. And so at about 5 p.m., Hal got to their house, and right away when he pulled up, he noticed that Leila and Raymond's car, the Oldsmobile, was not in the driveway. And so Hal thought that was pretty odd because by now they should have been back from the festival. In years past, they would always get home by about 3 p.m. at the absolute latest because they didn't like staying out late, and so it just seemed odd that they were not back by now. But at the same time, Hal knew that Leila had been thinking about maybe going out and doing something spontaneous after the event was over, and so he thought, maybe his mom and Raymond were out driving around somewhere and they'd be back later. But just for good measure, Hal did park the car and he walked up to the front door of the house and he did knock, but when there was no answer, he thought, you know what, I'll just go home and come back in a few hours and check in on them at that point. And so, a few hours later, at 8 p.m., Hal drove back to Leila and Raymond's house, and when he got there, he saw their car was still not back yet. And so now Hal's starting to feel pretty worried, and so he parked the car, he walked up to the front door, he did knock, there was no answer, and so he pulled out his set of keys, he opened up the door, and he walked inside. Now, as soon as he was in the house, nothing looked out of place. It actually looked very organized and clean like it normally was, but as he walked around looking for some sign of where Leila and Raymond were, all he could find was on one of the beds there were all these neat stacks of clothes that were laid out as if somebody was getting ready to pack but didn't finish packing. And so it just seemed like something's off here, something's not right. This doesn't seem like they just went out and did something spontaneous. Something must have happened at the festival. That's why they're not back yet. And so kind of in a panic, Hal ran outside and he called the police. And after reporting Leila and Raymond missing, he actually began calling news stations and telling them, can you please put out my mom and Raymond's picture because they're older and they're missing, I need your help. And in fact, that night, those TV stations did begin putting out all these reports about how Leila and Raymond were missing and for people to be on the lookout for them and their car. At the same time, the police immediately launched an investigation, and they quickly discovered that Leila and Raymond had never even made it to the music festival. They never got there. And then when the police drove the route that Leila would have taken to get to the music festival, they didn't find any car accidents or anything unusual on the route that would indicate that they got into some trouble or something. They checked their phone records, and Leila and Raymond had called nobody. There was no action on their credit cards, and so they hadn't bought anything. And the police would send out all these missing person reports to police officers all over the state of Texas, and nobody reported seeing anything or hearing anything. That is, until 3 days later on July 2nd. On that night,